Go ahead, Pastor.
Turn the recorder off.
Turn the recording on.
Yeah. Oh, speaking of that, Bong, all I have on my screen is this green shield. And so last week I was trying to do that, and brings me to a um, a screen. So was I pressing the wrong thing? Was I supposed to press what was I supposed to do?
And when you say green thing, is that the share screen?
Well, no, up here on the left-hand corner, I have like a shield that has kind of like a check mark. And when I hover over it, it says you are using enhanced encryption. I don't have a record
Oh,
button. Yeah.
okay. Well, that's just the meeting information. So most of your controls are on the bottom of the screen every
Okay.
time you move the mouse. And
Oh, I see
if
record here. Yes,
there you go.
yes, 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 yes. Okay.
And you
All right.
can do your own recording too if you need to. So feel free to do that
Yeah.
at your own leisure.
See, old people can learn new things. Okay,
That's right.
before we get started, I want to cover um, your reading, not so much in Doherty because I don't know about you, but I had a hard time with that one. But in Bennington, I wanted to cover number one for the reason is when you study history, it's primarily a reading course. So a lot of times, you know, if you go to like history class, they'll give you reading quizzes to continue to make you to read. We're not going to take any field trips or we're not going to do any labs. So primarily your material is reading, right? So, so in Bennington, he talks in chapter 6 about the divisions among Baptists in the 19th century. And the reason why I want to cover this too is because some of the things he's mentioned will show up tonight, right, in different things. So I'm just going to go through these, not in detail, but I'm just going to go through this and then, we can talk about, at least familiar ourselves with, what it is. Okay, so when Bennington or Bebbington, I'm sorry, talks about the anti-missionary controversy, who remembers what he's talking about? This was a problem in the 19th century, in the 1800s, the anti-missionary controversy.
Oh, what are about?
Yeah, you remember?
They believe that they
It
don't.
had to do with.
They believe.
Go ahead.
They believe that they don't have to go out to share the
Right.
gospel,
Right.
because it's
And
the work
why
of
is
God.
that?
Because
Yeah, why is that?
it's not our work, but it's God's work to save people. It's because of the idea of um um
Double
God is the,
predestination.
Right,
yeah,
right, right,
predestined.
right. So we don't have to go out because God will do that. So we don't. Well, even when you think about, even if you took that theology, if you took that line, let's say you actually believe that, right? God knows who will accept him, right? But we don't know who's going to accept him. So we have to go out and we have to share the gospel. And it's up to the person and God whether that person will accept Christ or not. Okay, that was good. Boy. All right, now, when I talked to you about the communion controversy, what was that about? Remember what that was about? We talked about that.
Last Supper.
The Lord's Supper, right? We talked about the Lord's Supper. And what about the Lord's Supper? Now, earlier when we talked about Luther and Calvin Zwingli, what were we talking about when they talked about communion? And about the transubstantiation is
It thinks it's the body of Christ. It turns into
some of the elements were there, right? Consubstantiation is that you're actually taking the blood of Christ. Okay, so we're going to jump to into the 19th century. And so when we talk about the communion controversy, what are we talking about? it affects your church today. You remember?
It's open to anybody.
Right,
You
right.
don't have to belong to the church.
Right, right. It's open to anybody who's a believer in Jesus Christ. And closed communion, other than that, would be
Only to the member of the
Those
church.
who baptize.
right. Only if you belong to that church. Okay. Yeah, good. Okay.
Yay!
Yeah. Okay. Okay. So when I talk about the Campbellite controversy, Alexander Campbell, who remembers about them?
Wait a second. Oh, like, what did he do? Oh.
Yeah, I remember that's the Campbellites. Alexander Campbell.
Give me a second.
Testament. Long is that? Are we on track? Is that what the Campbellites were wanting to do? Okay.
Sorry, my computer
All
is
right.
on and off, so go ahead.
Yeah, no, I just wanted to confirm with you. The Campbellites basically believe that we shouldn't have any confessions of faith. We should just have the New Testament, right? And do everything according to the New Testament, right? Okay, all right. All right, then the landmark had to do with there was a succession going to do is I have my notes and this is a rough copy so that there's a lot of typos on it. And what I was going to do is at the very beginning I have my cell number and my email address. And what I was going to do is email. I would have emailed this to you so you don't have to worry about remembering all the dates and taking down notes. You still can, but you don't have to do this, okay? So the two books that I found very helpful in today's presentation was a book that Pastor Bong introduced us to, was Leon Macbeth's Baptist Heritage, 4 Centuries of Baptist Witness. Another book that I found very helpful was by a man named Mark Knoll, and it's called A History of Christianity in the United States and Canada. So let's begin. So tell me what you know about people coming to America. What do we know about them?
Came out of Mayflower.
Came on the Mayflower. Okay. Good.
Pilgrimage.
There were pilgrims, right?
They were seeking for freedom in religion.
Right. Have you ever been to you may or may not, but have you ever been to the replica of the Mayflower on the East Coast? It's very small. It is like maybe about the size of maybe a tractor trailer, the 40-foot container with the truck on. It's really small. And so, but you know what was so amazing about it is that the people on it, the dossiers, I guess you call it, they are in museums and they show you around. They talk about, they act just like they dress and they act just like they were in 1620. It's amazing, and you should go and visit that when you're on the East Coast sometime. All right, so here is how Baptists came to America. Okay, so when people started coming to America, there were really very few Baptists here. In fact, there were very few Baptists in the colonies. Okay, and the people in America, or the people that came from England, settled in three different colonies, and we're going to look at those colonies tonight. Okay, so we can say that Baptists in America have their beginnings from English Baptists, because tell me what happened um, as we were talking about Europe. Who can remember about the Baptists in Europe?
Mm, Europe.
Yeah, don't kick too hard. who who can tell me in England and places like that? Who can tell me what's happening? Basically, what was happening in England is going to be what's happening in America. So they're just going to bring their issues with them to America. Okay. So okay, so the Pilgrims came for religious freedom, and they settled into three different colonies in the northeast. Okay. Anybody have any chance know what these colonies were?
Uh,
Three different
England,
colonies,
oh, oh, oh.
New England,
right?
New
New England is
England,
one.
the Mids colonies, and the Southern colonies
Right. Those are the
in
three that they
Massachusetts.
settled in. Right. Those are the three that they settled in.
They start in New Hampshire, New England.
Yeah. Right.
But
Yeah, they settled in the top would be the North England colony. The bottom is in the mid colony, and the bottom is the southern colony, which was primarily developed, or not developed, but made up of southern states, right? Okay. All right. So let's talk about the Baptist work in New England. Okay. Um, Interestingly enough, the Baptist work in New England, the colonies in New England, first of all, grew really rapidly. Anybody care to guess why they grew really rapidly?
because it's like they came from um, actually Irish. A lot of people from England, New Hampshire, they came from, Europe. It's like they came from England and Ireland. So a lot of those uh, people, they moved to New Hampshire. So part of those
Yeah. So now,
this religion, yes.
yeah. So now, okay. So the European continent, you have Germany, you have all of these countries, and then England is a separate island. Um,
yes.
so when we oftentimes they talk about the continent, they're talking about the European continent, right? Not England. Okay. When you talk about Great Britain, you're talking about all of the lands that the English are in charge of. That's what make up Great Britain. Okay. So the Congregational Church was very established in the New England colonies. In fact, they were a state-sponsored church in the New England colonies. Um, they practiced their own unique um, doctrines, and here came the Baptists, and the Baptists also preached their own religious doctrines. Okay, so because of the early Baptists in England, because the Baptists came to England, they were persecuted. Can you believe that you were be persecuted for being a Baptist? I mean, like today, what do we hear about the persecutions? Who are they persecuting?
Christian.
Christians, right? And you
Yes.
would think that Baptists are Christians, right? So, the Puritans would be persecuting the Baptists, and that's it's just kind of blows your mind, yeah, today about persecution. Normally we hear like the Muslims are persecuting Christians, right? So, so, um, so that's what happened. That's the start in New England. That the English colonies were growing fast. There was the state church in Massachusetts that was set up. There were Puritans, and the Congregational Church established itself in the New England colony. Now, when you talk about the New England colony, you cannot get away from the person of Roger Williams. Okay. Who remembers what we talked about Roger Williams? We didn't talk about him very much, but who remembers what Roger Williams did?
He, Mr. Roger William, who organized the First Baptist Church in Providence, I think way back since 1639.
Right.
And he was
Exactly.
born on 16, okay, right there.
Yeah. He was born in 1603, and he was born in London. He was the son of James and Alice Williams. Now, we're not really sure of the exact date of Roger Williams. I tell you why. Um, Williams belonged to the Saint Sepulchre Church in London, and in 1666 there was a fire that destroyed a lot of birth records. So we're not really sure about his birth. Um, Now, this is something interesting about Roger Williams. Okay, um, Sir Edward Coke was a chief justice in what they call the King's Branch, right? Somebody really important, okay? And Coke used to attend, or he was a worshiper at Saint Sepulchre's Church. And one day he noticed that Williams had an unusual skill in recording. I mean, like today, right? We're recording this lesson, right? And because we've talked about this many times, because of the coronavirus, we're getting more recordings, right? And we're putting it on stream, okay? But this is what happened. He noticed, this man Coke noticed that Roger Williams was recording the pastor's sermon in shorthand. Can you imagine that you have to write everything the pastor said, you're writing down? How many of you could do that, you think?
I think
Do that.
the new generation doesn't know what is shorthand now.
That's true. So, I mean, I don't know either. I don't know if he was writing in the shorthand we know today in business, or if it was another type of shorthand. So, Coke was so impressed with Roger Williams that he offered him a position in his law office. And so that's why Roger Williams was so good in understanding legal terms and legal procedures, right? In fact, Coke was so impressed with him that he even paid for Williams' education, Roger Williams' education. Now, Williams had been enrolled in a place called Sutton's Hospital. He was enrolled in that in 1621. Now, what do you think? When I read that, it just kind of struck me kind of odd. What do you think Sutton's Hospital is? Maybe in your reading you discovered what it is. Sutton's Hospital. Okay. I was just as clueless as you were. Comes to find out that this hospital was renamed the Charter House, and it was a school. So obviously what they did, in my opinion, I think, that they took this hospital and converted it into a school. And so Williams attended this school, and it was kind of like a high school. Kind of like the lesson, it wasn't really, he says that he went to college, but the lessons were not really that, you had math, you had English, you had things like that. But it wasn't like college where you have English 101 or you have calculus and things like that, right? But later on, Williams attended what was called Pembroke College, and then and Pembroke College was associated with Cambridge University. Where do you think Cambridge University is today? It's kind of like England, right? Right.
England, yeah.
Right, England, yeah. It's kind of like the sister university to Oxford, right? Now, Williams uh, was reared up as an Anglican, and he was sympathetic to people who were religious dissenters. And one day he had a deep spiritual experience, and he became a Puritan. Now, let's review now. Who are the Puritans? They wanted to purify the
New England, I mean, Church of England.
The Catholic Church.
the Catholic Church, right?
Yeah.
Is that right? Wrong? Would you correct us that the Puritans are people that wanted to purify the Catholic Church? Is that right?
It's more like the reformers are trying to reform the Catholic Church. The Puritans are the one that wants
those
to
were
purify the
Zwingli,
Church of England.
Calvin, and Luther.
Right. So the Puritans are more connected to the Church
Yeah,
of England,
Church of
the
England.
Anglican Church.
Right. When he became a Protestant, guess what happened to him? He upset his parents. He even got kicked out of his father's house. Can you believe that? How many of you know of maybe a person, another Christian brother or sister, that when they became a Christian, they were kicked out of their house? Maybe in the Philippines or something like that. How many?
There's a lot.
There's a lot. Are you familiar with some,
Yeah.
Hazel?
I believe Pastor Mar is one of them. Yeah,
Yeah, right.
because their family they actually have a priest in the family.
Wow.
So when he became a Christian, especially when he went to school for the pastor, he was actually kind of like banned in the family.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, very, very. And so we have to really, actually, they're martyrs. So we really have to respect Pastor Marr. When Williams graduated from Cambridge, he became ordained, but he didn't become a pastor. He became more of a chaplain. And as we think about Roger Williams, we have to realize that the future was not very promising for separatists in England. So he decided that he would accept he would come to New England. He would accept the call in October of 1635. Now, interesting enough, when Williams came here, he ended up in Boston, and he actually got arrested for teaching. The authorities found that his teaching was very objectionable. First, the kings of England claimed that the land in America belonged to them. They had the power over the lands of America, even though all the lands that the English were occupying, they felt like kings felt like that land belonged to him, right? Just kind of like what the kings felt about English lands, right? And so William said, "No way, Jose, that ain't right." In fact, what we should do is that we should pay the North American Indians for land that we've taken. We should purchase the land. Okay, so that was one objection. He objected that the idea of the king of England owning the land here in America. The second thing that he objected was what they call the Freeman's Oath, was required by settlers in Massachusetts Bay. It was kind of like a pledge of allegiance. You know how like I don't know, but when I was in grade school, we always used to say the pledges of allegiance to the flag. And William saw this as a religious oath taken in God's name. It's kind of like a government required prayer. That's something he didn't like. And he believed that non-Christians really shouldn't take this prayer, right? You know, like today we complain. What do we complain about today about prayer in school? What do we talk about a lot about prayer in school?
A lot of people don't want it.
Right. A lot of people don't want it, right? But as Christians, we feel like America has really gone downhill because they've gotten away from God, right? Well,
Mhm.
here, Roger Williams, who believes in religious freedom, says that non-Christian people shouldn't be expected to say this state church type of prayer, right? So he didn't believe that there should be prayer in school. Also, thirdly, so that was the first was the he felt like the English kings don't owe the land. Second, he felt like the we shouldn't say the freedom's oath, which was kind of like a pledge of allegiance, um, and that he didn't believe that there should be prayer in school because you're forcing non-Christian people to say that prayer. Um, and then thirdly, Williams believes Christians should withdraw from the Church of England and withdraw from everyone who does not leave the church. In other words, he believes so strongly that Christians needed to be, you know, enough of this trying to change and purify the Anglican Church. You know, you just need to completely leave. Kind of like Luther said, you know, I'm going to completely leave the Catholic Church. Okay, so and then finally, um, what what um, Roger Williams said was um, he divided the Ten Commandments into two tables. Okay, the first table concerned his a person's duty to God, and the second table concerned a person's duty to his fellow men. Now, if you take a look at the Ten Commandments, they're divided. Have you ever noticed that it's kind of like the cross? Part of the Ten Commandments have to do with your relationship to God, and part of the Ten Commandments have to do with your relationship to each other, right? What would be one that has to do with your relationship with God,
The first one.
which would be
Love your God.
love your God with all your heart. Okay. What would be a commandment that has to do with your fellow man?
Love your neighbor.
Love your neighbor. Um, so he felt, Roger Williams felt that governor, or the governor and the government could punish people for breaking the laws that have to do with your relationship to your fellow man. But he did not believe that the government should punish people or punish offenders for breaking the first law. That he felt like should be a something that the church should do. The authority to do that should fall under the church. And later on, this breaking of the laws of the first table and the second table, and the idea of the government only um, arresting and charging people who break the laws between fellow men, that would become the separation of church and state. Remember, we talked about the separation of church and state several weeks ago, right? That would be one of the reasons why it became that. So, anybody have any questions, comments before we continue on? Okay, so if Roger Williams was a Puritan, he was a Puritan. How did he become a Baptist? I mean, um, how did he form the First Baptist Church in Providence in 1639?
I just read that.
Yeah, in March of 1639, Williams and several other people formed the Baptist Church in Providence. And it was the earliest Baptist church in the New World, believe it or not. Now, there were many factors why Williams would become a Baptist. First of all, he was familiar with Baptist life and Baptist conventions in England. That's how he was familiar with Baptists. He was involved with Baptists in England. And he was familiar with the Dutch language and the writings of Dutch Anabaptists. Remember, who were the Anabaptists? We talked about the Anabaptists. They were, okay, you had the separatists, right? And then on the other hand, is that right, Bong? You had the Anabaptists, and there were two, kind of like two lines that were trying to get away from the Anglican Church, right? So he knew the Anabaptists, and there were a number of Baptists from England that migrated not only to Providence, but also some that landed in different colonies. They moved to Providence as well. All right. So what can we say? What was the contributions to Roger Williams to baptism? Okay. Somebody take a stab. Just a wild. Well, first, Williams was an incredible, intelligent man. In fact, he was one of the influential thinkers of America. And he made significant, not only religious, but political contributions to our country. So first, we can say that one of his contributions was that Williams was a missionary to the American Indian. When I read that, I was sort of really not shocked, but pleasantly surprised. When I was in my 20s, I was a minister of youth at an Indian Baptist church, American Indian Baptist church in Shawnee, Oklahoma. I was going to school in Oklahoma. And one summer, we took a trip to go to North Dakota to the Cannonball Reservation. One of the things about the Cannonball Reservation is Sitting Bull's grave is by a riverbank in that reservation.
Oh,
And what we did was it was a mission trip. What we did was we spent time doing vacation Bible school for the kids during the day, and we spent the nights holding revival. It is extremely, extremely difficult to witness to the American Indians because they believe that this is the white man's religion, and the Indians have always had trouble in transitioning to American life. And so therefore, alcoholism is really bad there. In fact, the little country store that was there in that Indian reservation, I think was ranked the third leading in the nation to move alcohol. I mean, that was that much alcohol that was broken. And so much money and time has been given to the evangelism of the American Indians. So that I know that was really a hard job for. Um, um, now, now, one of the things he was fighting when he was trying to evangelize the American Indians is that most people, most white people, thought about the American Indians as heathen dogs. I mean, they were really derogative and heathen dogs. So remember, the first thing is Roger Williams identified and tried to evangelize the American Indians. All right, any questions so far? Okay, and then of course, this doesn't come to any surprise to us. The second thing is that Williams believed that everybody should have religious freedom. Okay, and we mentioned this last week or the week before that. Williams authored two publications, The Bloody Tenet of Persecution in 1644, and a second publication, The Bloody Tenet Yet More Bloody in 1652. And Williams believed, as we said earlier, in the separation of the church and state, that the state, okay, tell me as we think about the separation of church and state today, tell me, what do you think it means? Or tell me, what has it become? Remember, William said, I think that the crimes between man and man, it's okay for the government to take care of, but um, sins between God and man should be reserved for the religious authorities or God. What is the separation of church become today? I want us to see how vastly different it is today. The separation of church and state today has come where they shouldn't be any religious um, symbols, any prayers, anything religious in the government, in the public schools, in places like that, right? But the real spirit of the separation of the church and state is that the government should not get involved in religion. In other words, like uh, the Anglican Church, you have to belong to the Anglican Church, right? So today, or the spirit of the spirit of the separation of church and state is that the government shouldn't interfere in the business of the church, right? See how far it's come, how kind of like what's the term? Perverted it's become. That they use it for blocking out all religion, right? When the separation of church and state was to protect the church. Okay, let's see what else now. And Roger Williams believed in democracy, although he never used the word. Even in the plantations of Providence, he felt like the way they do decisions is by majority rule, right? That's how we govern our nation today. But also, is that what else do we govern? That's governing our nation, but what else do we use the democracy for?
Justice.
Church.
Church,
We do
right,
that too.
right, right. We use Robert's Rules of Order. All in favor, would you raise your hand? All opposed by like sign. But you realize that they didn't use that in the New Testament? Like what they did when they chose the men who served the women that were not getting their daily allowance, what the apostle says, okay, you choose, we'll leave it among you, you choose these able-bodied person, and you just go ahead and do it. We won't get involved. We'll just spend our time with prayer and preaching of God's word, right? But now we do everything by the democratic process, right?
And Pastor,
Yes, go ahead, Gan.
at the same time, nowadays, our democratic government is trying to take us away from God, from the church.
Right.
Especially when Obama take over the presidency. And now we have those guys trying to be so active and trying to to take over the power so they can do what they want.
Right. You notice that when now, of course, we're not going to get political, but I just want you to see the difference with Roger Williams. But you notice that today with the COVID, we're relying more and more on the government, right? The PPE, what else? So the government needs to send funds to help the businesses. The government has to do that. Now, I'm not saying that's wrong. I'm just saying that we're really depending now on the government, right? And there may be a danger that the government might overstep its bounds and start telling the church what to do. For instance, I give you an example, okay? So there's somebody in our church. Well, okay, our church, when the PPE, the program for the payroll protection came out, our church, our staff decided not to take it for several reasons, right? A lady in our church who owns a business is really now pushing that we it's too late for the PPE, but to get some kind of CARES Act, right? One of the comments that were made in our administrative team's discussion about that is that this person said, I'm really, really leery of the government. Now, it's when you get the money from the government, it's supposed to be a loan, supposed to be forgivable. But as things happen, um, the government might start interfering with the church, and we might have to give that money back, right? So I just bring that up as an illustration of how far we've come between the separation of church and state. All right, any comment on Roger Williams? We're going to move on to another influential figure in the New England colonies. Okay, the other person I want you to introduce you to is a person named John Clark. He was the Second Baptist Church in America was founded in Newport, Rhode Island in 1644, and its founder was John Clark. John Clark was born in 1609 and passed away in 1676. He was not only a minister, but he was a medical doctor. And although Williams was a Baptist for a few months, that's hard to believe, founding the First Baptist Church of Providence. But the reality is, the truth is that Roger Williams was only a Baptist for a few months. He somehow got disenchanted with Baptist theology. But on the other hand, John Clark served as a Baptist minister for nearly 40 years. Now, what's some background about John Clark? Excuse me, allergies. Clark was born in Suffolk County in England on October of 1609, as we said. And he was the son of Thomas and Rose Clark. And believe it or not, he was baptized several days after he was born. And from the writings and what we know about Clark, he was very well educated, but we don't know where he went to school. In his writings, he uses, big words. He seems to write well. So we know that he was well educated. Some even speculate that he attended the University of Leiden, which we don't have any records of. But there he became acquainted with Dutch Anabaptists. Let's talk about the church that Clark started, the First Baptist Church of Newport. Okay, so we're not really sure when John Clark became a Baptist, but some have the opinion that he became a Baptist in England, and others believe that he became a Baptist in Holland. Remember, he was familiar with the Dutch Anabaptists, right? So people speculate that Clark came to America in the early 1640s, and he was affiliated with a church in Portsmouth, New Hampshire. Anybody has been to the East Coast, the New England area?
I did, Pastor. I used to live in Key, New Hampshire.
Oh, okay. What was it like there?
Oh, it's cold, and it's like a more old towns, quiet, and
Yeah,
I would say
yeah, and
a lot of white people, not too many Asian, not too many black. It's all
Yeah.
a bunch of Irish and white, and
yeah, yeah,
it's beautiful. It's a beautiful states, I would consider.
yeah, and it has those colonial type houses,
Yes.
and then it has like they call it I don't know if it's in New Hampshire, but I know in Boston and in Connecticut by the seacoast, those houses have what they call a widow's walk. It's kind of like a little, what you call that? Patio or little,
Gazebo.
Don't speak.
Yes.
well, it's a place where what would happen is,
Rhode Island.
yeah, when the ships would come in, you know, that time the sea travel was very dangerous, right? It's kind of like watching the show The Most Deadliest Catch. Have you ever watched that? It's about fishing boats, right?
Yes.
And you know the waves come over. So it was kind of like that in the 1800s, 1700s, like that. And what would happen is when the ship came in, these women who were waiting for their husbands would come up and it's kind of like a place where they could perch and see if their husbands were coming home. If they didn't see their husbands, they knew that their husband was killed at sea. So they had a lot of widows walk there. You know, it's interesting that Boston and where Rhode Island, Providence, Rhode Island, you would think that they were big cities like LA and you because they're important, right, in American history. But they're very small cities. I wouldn't say that they're the size of Hilo, but they might be the size of kind of like Kahului or something. It's bigger than Hilo, but a little bit smaller than Honolulu. And so, yeah, the East being on the East Coast is really interesting. Um, so getting back to John Clark, now in this church at Portsmouth, we don't really know what denomination it was, but there were two factions in the membership. There are two different groups in the membership, right? One group held authority of the inner lights. In other words, they felt like spiritual experience was important. You know, we feel the Lord. I mean, we feel repentance, right? The other group held on to the ordinance. You know, this is how we worship God. We have the Lord's Supper. We have baptism. We have this. That's how we feel the Lord. Clark led the group that believed that there was authority in the written scriptures, and in 1641, a controversy came about that led to a split, and actually Clark and the others left the church and planted another church in Portsmouth. Now, the Portsmouth church had several serious problems. Okay. Um, Although Clark and others were particular Baptists, the membership also included General Baptists. Can you believe that? There were two types of churches. Wrong was in England, were there two types of Baptists in one church? Did we cover that?
No, we did not.
Yeah. So, okay, we have that situation at Puna Baptist, okay? So Puna Baptist is in Pohoa, and Paradise Park is about maybe 10 miles away from us, Paradise Park Baptist Church. But a lot of people from the mainland retire and settle into the Pohoa area, right? A lot of the people in our church don't have a Southern Baptist background. So we have to teach them about what Lottie Moon is, what Annie Armstrong is, what Suni Shikawa. We have to teach them how we do about. So can you imagine to have the General Baptists who say, you know, the gospel is meant for everybody, and the particular Baptist that says, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute, wait a minute. Why go out and evangelize when only God knows who's going to come, right? It breeds for a lot of conflict. We have enough conflict in our churches. You have more conflict, yeah. All right, getting back. Okay, so the General Baptists were called Six Principal Baptists, and actually they were founded on the 6 points of Hebrews 6, 1 to 2. Anybody got a Bible? Hebrews 6, 1 to 2. Let me see if I can punch it up. Hebrews 6, 1 to 2. Okay. Hebrews 6, 1 to 2.
Do you want someone to read it, Pastor?
Yeah, if you haven't, why don't you read it?
Okay, Hebrews 6, 1 to 2.
Right.
Therefore, let us move beyond the elementary teaching about Christ and be taken forward to maturity, not laying again the foundation of repentance from acts that lead to death and of faith in God, instructions about cleansing rites, the laying of hands, the resurrection of the dead, and eternal judgment.
Okay. Now, those are the 6 points of the General Baptist. The particular Baptists only believed in the 5 points. What they didn't believe in was the laying on of hands on new converts. They never practiced that, right? Another controversy which came about rose on whether they need to observe, whether they need to worship on Saturday or Sunday. That's another controversy. No, 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 no. You know, we need to. Okay, first of all, that's an interesting thing. Maybe we should discuss. Okay, the Seventh Day Adventists worship on Saturday. Why do they worship on Saturday? Anybody who knows anything about the Seventh Day Adventists?
That's the
Because that's the last day of the week for them. It starts on Sunday and ends on Saturday.
In reality, that's the timeline for us, right? The first day of the week is Sunday, and the last day of the week is Saturday. Now, what
The
we
Sabbath
do,
day.
yeah, the Sabbath, right? Now, what we do is we kind of like um, Christianize Sunday, and a lot of times we call it, oh, this is our Sabbath and whatever. But in reality, when you look at the Old Testament, Sabbath is always on Saturday. You know, there's no way about getting Saturday. The Saturday is the Sabbath, at least in Genesis, right? Um, Now, let's talk about this. Is it wrong? Okay, so why do we as Christians worship on the on Sunday? Why do you think we worship on Sunday?
because that's the end
Has
of
to do with the resurrection.
because that's when Jesus basically rose from the
Right,
dead on Sunday.
right, right. So we as Christians identify with that, and so that's why we worship on Sunday. Now, anybody, Bong, do you know when we started or how early that started? People worshiping on Sundays.
Very early on. In fact, the Apostle Paul, when he wrote to the Corinthians, have already affirmed the tradition of meeting on the first day of the week. When John wrote the book of Revelations, he was caught up in the heavens, and when he saw the image, and he coined it as on the day of the Lord, so the first day of the week. So somewhere around maybe 60, 70 AD.
Okay. So that's how long we've been worshiping. So I don't want you to feel like, you're breaking a law or something by worshiping on Sunday. Let me introduce you to a person named Stephen Mumford. He was the first Baptist to come to Newport in 1665, and he is the one that supported worship on Saturday. In fact, he offended people in the church when he said, "It's okay, you can plow on Sunday, no problem," right? Now there was an assistant pastor named Obadiah Holmes, a guy by the name of John Randall, and Clark. One day they had this. They were invited to visit this private residence, and so Clark took it upon himself. He felt like, okay, well, I'm being invited here. He started talking about Baptist convictions, right? And it comes to find out that he got arrested, convicted, and whipped publicly because he expressed his Baptist convictions. And um, Clark debated four principles at that particular meeting. Okay, what are the four principles that Clark debated? First, Clark debated that Christ is Lord of every area of your life. Christ is Lord of every area of your life, right? The second thing that he debated was that baptism should be reserved for believers only, not infants, and the people should be immersed, not sprinkled. The third thing that he argued that all believers, included unordained laymen, may speak for Christ in and out of the church. Finally, religious liberty was God-given right for everyone. Okay, so let's take of these and see if that applies to us today. First of all, Christ. Do we believe that Christ should be um, in charge of every area of our life? Is that what
Definitely.
we believe today?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, Pastor, definitely.
Okay. What is the one area that people usually find very hard to give up? One area, okay, like okay, I give you, Lord, my, I give you, Lord, my work. I give you, Lord, my children, my wife, my relationship with this. I give you my church, but there's one area that that
Finance.
tends to make Christians struggle about giving up to the Lord. What do you think that is?
My guess is financial.
Right, right. People really have a hard time, really letting their hands go. Right? It's financial. A lot of times, I find that's what, as a pastor, I find out. Did you know somebody said that when you go to worship, you should have three books with you, right? The first
Textbook,
book, three books. When you go to worship, you should have three books. What do you think they are?
the Bible,
Bible.
Bible is one.
notebook,
Notebook, yeah. Okay, not what I'm thinking of, but that's good. Notebook.
Your
Maybe you
and
need four
checkbook.
books.
checkbook.
Checkbook, right. And then the other one was your hymn book. So in other words, when you come to worship, right, you have we sing praises to the Lord, we hear the preaching of God's word, and we support the work of the ministry there. All right. Okay, good. All right. So let's do this. How many of you believe that baptism should be reserved for believers only and not infants?
Yes.
All right. Okay, why do we believe that?
Because for the infant, they cannot even, they don't know the salvation. And for the adults, you make that decision based on, it's not your decision, it's the Holy Spirit, it's the grace from God.
Right, right. And why do we practice immersion? We talked about in the early sessions. Why do we practice immersion? There's all kinds of, there's sprinkling and everything, but we as Baptists practice immersion. Why is that? How do
It's
we
a
know
symbol.
that that's what we should do? It's the right
It's
way to do
symbol.
it.
Because that's what John the Baptist did to Jesus, when he just, baptized him. He
Right,
immersed him in the water.
right. So
It's a
in that situation,
symbolism.
Marian, right, go ahead.
It symbolizes the death and the resurrection of Christ.
Right. Marian, in the scripture that you are talking about, it talks about Jesus coming out of the water, right? He
Yes.
wouldn't be coming out of the water unless he was in the water. Okay. Another reason why we know that immersion is important is if you were to study Greek, the word baptizo means to dip or to immerse. That's the word that's written as it describes Jesus being baptized, right? All right, good discussion. Okay. Um, okay, now this is interesting. Um, how many of you believe that all believers, including unordained laymen, may speak for Christ in and out of the church? First of all, what do we mean by laymen? Who in the world is that?
Regular
Laymen.
people.
Regular people, right? Those who are not
You can join
part
me.
of the professional clergy, so to speak. Okay. Do we believe that? Do we believe?
Yes.
Okay. Um, I'm going to ask you this question. If we believe that with our heart, how come we don't practice that? we believe that with our heart, how come we don't practice that? I'll give you an example. Oh, Pastor, you know what? Could you witness to my friend? Oh, Pastor, please say a prayer to my friend, right? It's kind of like in my experience, it's kind of like a lot of people believe that, but in practice, they don't do that. They always think that somehow the pastor has really special powers. And so, what I'm saying is that if we believe that, we should practice that.
Maybe they don't know how to do it because they don't study the share quick that like study
No.
right now.
I think you're right, Marian. I think that we have not done a good job in discipling believers,
Lazy too.
in mentoring believers. We're coming out of what they call the church growth movement, where a lot of things that you're doing in your church comes from that movement, the secret sensitive movement, the praise team, the jumbo screen, um, and the pastor now wears jeans and shorts and whatever. And what it's saying is that we haven't discipled believers. We haven't discipled. All right. And then, how many of you believe religious liberty is a God-given right for everyone?
I do believe it.
Okay. Even for Muslims and for Buddhists and for Hindus, you believe that they should be allowed to practice what they believe.
Yes.
Okay.
No,
Yes.
Okay, why not?
You just said religious freedom.
I would say, well, you know what? The Jesus said he is the way and the truth, and then and the way no one comes to the Father through,
Yeah, but
and he's the only one who rose from the dead, and all of those Buddhists, they're all dead. They never rose from the grave like Jesus did. So they
sister,
yeah, explain to me.
do you see any Baptists going to the airport and sharing their testimony, like the Hindus, like those dancing and sharing their religion? If the government will not allow them to do that, and we, our Baptists, are not going to do it or not sharing it to the airport, they can abandon us. They can do it to us too. But, we let them do it because they practice a religion and we don't.
I think
I mean to say in that point, it's just because they are there at the airport, that's a religious belief. And us, we don't go to the airport, for example, and share the good news. But if they will tell them not to do it, they will tell it to us too. So we are part of the religious belief. But the only thing, we have if we can say, we have the true God.
Well, I do agree with you. We have to respect other people's religion too, based on, they respect our religion. But for Pastor Allen, the question is, for me, I just close the door, totally. I only believing in one God is Jesus Christ. So whatever they believe, they can believe it. But I think I'm just being curious about, talking stereotype that I just really disagree what they practiced. So, but you're absolutely right. We have to respect, their religion, like whatever they need to practice their religion, then I would practice my religion too as well.
Right. I think both of you are thinking well and thinking right. So Gani, yeah, that's true. Is that religious freedom needs to be for everyone, because if it's not for everyone, then it's not for the Baptists, not for the Christians too, But a lot of times we feel like that Christians are being persecuted. They won't say anything to Muslims, or they won't say anything about this, but when it comes to Christians and the Bible, oh boy, stuff like that. So religious freedom should be for everyone, so that we as Baptists could practice our religious freedom. But you're right, Marian, in the sense that, you know, the Bible says that Jesus is the truth, the way, and the life. Okay, so in this kind of environment where you have religious freedom, you know, everybody practices what they feel is best for them. Um, how are we to evangelize then? If, you know, in other words, you run across people that says, well, why should I become a Baptist or Christian? You know, mine's is just as good. How do you um, convince them that Jesus is the truth and the way? How do we do that with in this kind of environment where all the religions are, you know, good, all the religions have freedom to practice?
I would say you have to basically show it to them to the Word of God. Let them read the Bible and say, this is what the Bible said. And let them analyze that, because, you know, you cannot argue with the people who's really, you know, don't believe in the words of God. But the only way you can be able to prove it to them, when you're ready and you tell them, this is what the Bible said, and make them read it, and then, you know, and let them analyze it, and then someday God will open up their eyes and they said, oh wow, you are right. Because
Yeah.
I see a few people, the reason why they become a Christian and they become a Baptist, because, you know, they've been challenged by you know, the religion of Baptist. Yeah, but I know a few peoples that they used to be Iglesia ni Cristo, and then they convert to a Baptist, because, you know what, one of my friend, he showed it to them, you know, by reading the Word of God, and make them, you know what, answer the question correctly. That's what I would do. That are, you know.
Yeah. In other words, you have to. There's ground rules. You have to respect people, and so we have to find other ways of communicating the gospel. Um, so one of the ways is effective ways is building a relationship, right? Like Gani, okay, like we're talking about. I'll get to you then. We're talking about your gardening, right? And I
Yeah.
mentioned that that could be an evangelism. So what you do with your the fruits and vegetables that you grow and you share with people, you know, number one, they see, wow, Ghani's a very you know, giving person and whatever, but they're never going to figure out that you're a Christian until you tell them that you believe in Jesus Christ, right? So, okay, Danny, you were going to say.
You just kind of answered it while you're talking to them and getting to know them. You want to share something personal with about yourself that God did for you as a commitment story or evidence or something that God did for you. While is a good way to communicate.
Right, 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 right. Okay, we're going to move
And
down to,
Pastor,
yes, go ahead.
oh, and it's not about the religion, it's your relationship with Christ.
Mm,
So you're not really, um, sorry. So you're not really trying to convince them to change their religion, but build a relationship with Christ. And you have to know how to show compassion or
mhm,
show God's love through you to other people. Just like what I was sharing earlier about Mrs. Pentecost.
mhm.
Um, she doesn't really believe in God. And the only way we could show her that there is God is showing the Christ-like in ourselves.
Right,
Yeah.
right. I absolutely agree. Yeah, yeah. All right, let's move on to a settlement called Swansea. I don't know anything about this settlement except that it's in Massachusetts.
Mhm.
It was a settlement, and it was the site of the earliest church in Massachusetts. It is close to Rhode Island's border, and was influenced by Baptists in Providence. So in 1630, the records show they speak of a strong presence of Anabaptists in the area, And people with Baptist ties were growing in this settlement. Um, and then the Baptists found dissatisfaction with some of their practices, the practices of infant baptism. In fact, the practice was so strong that Massachusetts passed a law making infant baptism a crime. Can you believe that infant baptism was a crime?
Wow.
Right? I mean, the government steps in and says infant baptism is a crime. Now, would you agree with that if the government today said to the Catholics, you can't baptize infants today? Is that good or bad?
I,
Marian, is that good or bad if the government said to the Catholic Church, you can't baptize infants?
well, it's bad, Pastor, because, like you said, the government should not, what, they are trying to separate from the religion. And then, Catholic, that's the always been, way to baptize the children
The
and
practice.
to practice, yeah. And I would say that's wrong.
Theologically, you would,
The government telling us, you know what, you cannot, do the baptism
right,
when you're adult or when you. So
right. So theologically, you're saying infant baptism is wrong, but on principle, according to the freedom of religion, that the government is wrong to step in, right? That's what you're saying.
yes, that's what I'm
Okay.
saying.
All right, good, 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 good.
That's my opinion.
No, 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 that's good. We're all learning and we're all learning from each other, right? Okay. So let me talk to you about John Miles. He planted the earliest Baptist church in Swansea or near Swansea. And this was the oldest Baptist church in America to have its own building,
Wow.
right? Can you believe that? To have its own building. I mean, how many of you have your own building? We even have our own building. I believe it, okay.
Not
But
us.
Hazel, do you guys have your own building?
No, we don't.
But Pastor, I have a temple, the Holy Spirit.
You do, all of us do, yeah. Sometimes
Building.
that's right, all of us have our temple, right? Okay. Sometimes it's good to have a church building. You know, you can plan on certain things and whatever. Sometimes it's a real hassle. And all the money and everything that goes into maintaining the church and everything. It could go to evangelism, right?
Yes.
So we could go to training as well. All right. Okay. Again, in this particular church, the congregation was made up of particular and general Baptists. But in 1680, the general Baptists separated from this congregation and they practiced the laying hands of new converts. Okay, quickly, we're going to take a trip to Boston. How many of you have been to Boston?
Boston.
Boston.
All right. Okay, when you go to Boston, make
When
sure
you
you
going?
make sure you go on the duck tours.
Yes. And there's a lot of, Pastor, there's a lot of lobster, clam,
Ooh.
like a big
Yeah.
plate for all
Right.
types of seafoods.
Right. I've never been to a Red Sox game, but you should go to a Red Sox game.
Oh, yeah,
Okay.
that's the best.
Right. Okay. So the First Baptist Church of Boston was formed in June of 1665 and exercised great influence throughout New England. In fact, most of the First Baptist churches are very significant, even, all over the country. First Baptist Church of this, First Baptist Church of that. And the church began, believe it or not, with 9 members. And there were 7 men and 2 women. And there were members of the church and they believed against infant baptism. For example, this couple, Thomas Gould and his wife, when they gave birth to a child, refused to present their baby for a ceremony, a baptism ceremony in 1665. In fact, the Goos made it very plain to everyone how they felt, and they were so when they objected so strongly, they actually walked out of the church during the ceremony. What if you? So, okay, all you mothers, we were talking about this earlier before the session start, right? What if you opposed your daughter's or your son's mate, and you were so strongly opposed that during the middle of the service you would walk out of the church? Would you do that?
Oh, I used to do that. No, no, honest, I used to do that because you know why? I was sitting in the back of the church, yeah? I used to do bartender. I have a hangover, but I have to going to the church on that Sunday. So I sit in the back in the middle of the church. I have to walk out because I have to use the bathroom. Never came back. Just kidding.
Well, what is the argument you think this couple, the Goulds, had against infant baptism? We've mentioned it before. In fact, Marian, you've mentioned it tonight. They believe that infant baptism was not.
They cannot make the decision.
No, it was not scriptural. It wasn't in the Bible.
It wasn't in the Bible.
Yeah. And for several years, the Boston church endured constant persecution. Remember, the Baptists were persecution. And members prayed for relief. And in 1665, the church, and this is the reason why I mentioned this, all of a sudden, we're going to see a confession of faith. So in 1665, the Boston church adopted a confession of faith written by, guess who? By Thomas Gould, Gould. And so this is perhaps one of the first Baptist confessions of faith in America. And so he did this in 1665. Boston Baptist erected their very first church building under the leadership of a person named John Russell and Isaac Hall, who were co-pastors at the time. I thought that was very interesting that even back then they had co-pastors. Today you have co-pastors, back then they had co-pastors. And then this is what happened on February 15th, 1679. The members of the church, after they built it, it was their first time that they entered into the sanctuary. Now, shortly after them entering into the sanctuary, the government sealed off the building. Guess why they sealed off the building? Anybody can guess? The government leaders made a law that no person shall erect or make use of a house of public worship without a government license.
Oh.
You have to get a license to come to church, right?
Oh.
In a sense, do you think that happens today at our churches? Do you think the government has to approve for you to be in the church building?
Nope.
Today.
Right
no?
now with COVID.
Right, that's true. No, it's COVID. This happens today, not in the sense that you have to have a license, but when you build a church, you have to follow certain codes. The fire code, this code, that code. And if you don't have a permit or clearance from like the fire department, you don't have a permit to occupy the building. So I wanted to just kind of help you see that there's certain things that have not changed, right? Okay, all right. Let's move to Maine now. Kittering, Maine. What do we know about Maine today?
It's cold.
Cold? But
A lot of iron.
we'll talk about Kittering, Maine, and then we'll take a break, okay? Then when we come back, we'll talk about the Baptist beginnings in the middle colonies, okay? So, okay, well, the one answer I was really looking for, obviously, was lobster. How many of you have ever been to a lobster boil?
Lobster.
That's kind you see in the
It's
commercials. Have you been there?
Yes, I've been to the one in Canada.
Oh, wow. So that's the one you see on the TV. They have a bucket of lobsters. They have butter, lemon, right? And corn, and they're eating on the beach. Okay. So when I think about Maine, I think about lobsters.
Yeah.
So this man named William Skirvin, he was born in 1629 and he died in 1713. Believe it or not, he developed the earliest Baptist church in Kittering, Maine, in 1682. Don't don't um, don't get all um, panicky about the dates. If you go to the Google Class, Google Classroom, you'll find my paper. And then if you can't find it, if you give me your email, I'll go ahead and email a digital copy to you. So he did this in 1682, and he organized Baptist works in actually two different states. He organized it in Maine, which we can understand, and he organized it in another place, something that you probably would be very surprised at.
South Carolina.
Right, in the southern states, right? Remember, we're talking about the Baptist work in New England, right? We didn't even go to the middle states. So he developed it in South Carolina, and he was one of the most foremost Baptist leaders in early America. He was born in England in Somerton, and he came under the Baptist influence, or he came under the influence of a Baptist evangelist named Thomas Collier. When Skirvin was baptized in 1652, he preached for several years with Collier as his mentor. And Skirvin signed what is called the Somerton Confession. That's another thing I wanted to bring out, another confession of faith in 1656, and he fled to America to avoid persecution for having Baptist views while he was in Kittering. Wait, that doesn't make sense. Skirvin signed the Somerton Confession in 1656. Oh, okay. What he's called, he did that in England and he fled to America. That's more like it. To avoid persecution for having Baptist views in England, and he settled in Kittering, Maine. And although he lived several miles from First Baptist Church of Boston, Skirvin was a frequent attender at the Boston Church, and in 1696, he and most of the Boston Church migrated to Charleston, South Carolina. Wow. That's kind of like a lot of people do, right? Like, for instance, our associate pastor pastored or planted a church in California, and what happened was he had somebody come visit him from Russia, and then also the church started becoming doing mission trips to Russia. Eventually, Rob, our associate pastor, became a international missionary to Russia. So how you see how these relationships develop and how certain things develop. We'll see that more when we talk about the revivals, the Great Awakening. So, any questions? Any comments? Anything you're thinking about?
Nope.
All right, Bong, I think we can take a break.
Let's do that.
That's a very interesting. I like that.
What?
That's a very interesting, what sharing with us. And I really like it. It feels like social studies. It's one of my favorite subjects. So thank you so much. I feels like I'm going to travel from north going down to south.
Well, don't thank me. You haven't had the second part. You might think, oh my goodness, I hope he never teaches again.
No, Pastor, you did good. Thank you.
All right, we could take a break, get something to drink, eat something, and we'll be